And it's preparing. I'm just gonna wait for the bar to load and then I think we should be okay. All right, so I think we are live now. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit record and we can catch up. We're a little behind our time, so thanks for bearing with us. Let's
All
see.
good.
Here's record. Okay, so hey folks, this is SJ with Commission Shifts, and I'm here with Virginia Palacios, Commission Shifts Executive Director, and we are back to talk about the Railroad Commission open meeting. And so these are roughly once a month open meetings hosted by the State Oil and Gas Agency. They are infamously short, but with many, many agenda items going into the 500s, I think it was today. So to bring a little bit of education and transparency to these very dense open meetings, we are going to talk about some of the highlights and what the impacts of these agenda items are on the rest of us here in Texas. So that is my spiel. Virginia, would you like to share a little bit about some of the items that we were watching on today's agenda?
It was not as packed of an agenda as we're used to seeing. And so there were only a few kind of issues that Commission Shift is actively working on that came up. One of those, the first issues was related to disposal wells. And so these are wells that dispose of produced water or like salt water that's naturally occurring and produced from oil and gas wells. So these injection wells, operators have to get a permit for them from the Railroad Commission. And there was one operator applying for several well permits out in Culberson County. And it's about 50 miles away, more or less, from this geyser-like well blowout that just occurred last month out in Toyah, Texas, which is near Balmorhea State Park. Balmorhea is this beautiful spring oasis in the middle of the West Texas desert. And these disposal wells would have been about 50 miles away, more or less. Um, there were several oil and gas well operators and other disposal well companies that had protested these particular disposal well permits. Um, it's kind of common for other disposal well operators to protest each other's permits. That's one of the ways that they compete. The Railroad Commission doesn't like it and has discouraged it in the past. However, one of the protestants was Chevron USA. And so they said, we have wells in the area that are plugged and unplugged, and we're worried about this disposal well adding too much pressure and the fluids leaking and leaking through our unplugged wells, right? And so that was interesting to see, not surprising though, because just a couple of counties away at the border of Ward and Crane counties sits Antina Ranch, and they have had a lot of problems with Chevron wells leaking on their property. And so um, the Railroad Commission proposal for decision is something that comes out before the open meetings. It's available on the Railroad Commission's website, so you can kind of see what the recommendation from Railroad Commission staff is going to be before the commissioners even vote on it. And in that PFD or proposal for decision, we could see that the staff was likely to approve or was going to recommend that the commissioners approve these disposal well permits anyway. And the reason for that was that the staff had looked at the proposed injection interval underground, and they had determined that it would be appropriately sealed and there weren't going to be faults that intersected the zone. And so they didn't expect there to be any leakage based on the data they had available. But what was a twist at this meeting was that the commissioners did not approve these permits. Commissioner Wright spoke up and he said, I would like more time to look at this, and they passed it to the next conference. And so it's good to see the commissioners like taking more time to look at these disposal well permits. And I think they have a tough job, especially Railroad Commission staff. The rules for these types of injection well permits kind of only allow them to look at so much information, and they're kind of like limited to whatever information is available from the operators and the protestants. And so they kind of have to like sift through a lot of data and make the best call at the end of the day. And so hopefully they get more information or the information they need to make the best decision here.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
yeah.
interesting. I was going to ask, what you thought it meant that they passed on that decision today, because that does happen from time to time where an agenda item comes up and you see, we have information on the website about what it is, and we have this expectation, and the one of the commissioners will say, I want to pass on this, I want to look at this for longer. And I was wondering, does that mean that they are probably in disagreement with what the recommendation is from their staff, or could it mean lots of different things?
It could mean it could mean other things, it could mean they want to make sure that all the information is actually being considered. That's probably like the best way of imagining them to be acting. The other thing that could be happening, and we hope this is not the case, but it's a possibility because of the structure we have at the commission, is that they're getting campaign donations from some company and that's protesting the application, and they want to go in and have another look for that protestant. And so in the past, when we've looked at the Railroad Commissioner's campaign contributions, we've found that they would get donations before and after key decision-making moments, but also these saltwater disposal well companies are the top donors to their campaigns because they're always in this like competitive permit seeking
Mhm.
stance with the commission. And so because we have state laws that allow unlimited contributions from anyone associated with the company the commission regulates, and they can donate any time of year, this particular state agency is prone to that kind of influence from the industry.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, another example of a little bit of that opacity that's in these meetings when they defer. It's kind of, yeah, you just have to shrug and be like, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Maybe they're being influenced. But that's interesting. That's what happened today with these injection wells. Um, uh, should we talk about some of the other decisions that happened that did go through today?
Oh, let's see. Okay, so there were several flaring permits that were allowed, and this is routine for the Railroad Commission agendas. We just published a big flaring report finding that it's rare for them to actually reject any of these flaring permits, but even when they do reject them, or when they have rejected them, this is kind of past tense, the operators came back the same year and got the same flaring permits that were previously rejected. So that was disheartening. But we've also found that the Railroad Commission has no way to enforce the volume or time limits that they put on their flaring permits. And so we would like to see a complete overhaul of that system. What is happening right now that is very interesting and related to this is that the federal government passed a rule, the EPA passed a rule requiring operators to find and fix methane leaks from oil and gas supply chain, wells and other infrastructure like pipelines. And part of that methane rule requires oil well operators to uh, eliminate routine flaring. And so um, states now have to develop implementation plans for that federal rule. And so the TCQ just kind of kicked off that state implementation plan process this month. And so they have started to hold meetings in different parts of the state to start drafting that plan and what it's going to look like. But that's going to be taking place kind of like all year next year. In the spring and March, there's some other meetings from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and then I think the real like official part of the plan and the public comment period is going to take place in August. And so we'll be paying attention to that because there's this problem in Texas where the Railroad Commission permits the activity of venting and flaring, but they don't permit the pollution that occurs from venting and flaring. the TCEQ has control over the pollution that occurs. And so because that jurisdiction is split, whenever you have a pollution problem with venting and flaring, you can't actually get the company to stop doing the thing. And um, so I suspect the way the methane rule works might come out the same way, but we want to get involved in that process and make sure that at the end of the day, the practice is reduced and that people are kept safe. Um, and so the reason why it's important to limit venting and flaring is because it harms human health. It can exacerbate respiratory illnesses. People living next to high rates of flaring have higher odds of preterm birth. And that's not okay. And we shouldn't be just accepting that as the cost of doing business.
Yeah, well put. And we'll definitely have to keep an eye out on this rulemaking on the TCEQ side because it does affect so much of what the oil and gas industry will be doing on the development side, right?
Well, and the other thing that was interesting about today's meeting is the timing, right? And so we're post-election. We're going to have a new federal administration coming into office, the Trump administration. During Trump's first term, he rolled back dozens of environmental laws, and the methane rule was part of that. And so there was a methane rule that was passed during the Obama administration, and when Trump took office in 2016, he rolled it back. And so the Biden administration brought it back with even more standards, and now we're back to Trump. And so the commissioners were asking today, they were like, is this rule going to hold? And the reason why it might hold, number one, is because Congress passed this as a part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so previously in the Obama administration, it wasn't congressional authority that created the methane rule, it was just regulatory. And so when an agency passes a rule itself and Congress doesn't pass a law requiring it, that rule becomes vulnerable, right? And so this rule also has been finalized at a point in time where it's too late for the new presidential administration to roll it back more easily. So there's like a way where if a rule is passed within 60 days of inauguration day, the federal administration can kind of come in and take it back. But this rule is past that point. And so the Supreme Court also recently ruled on the methane rule, certain components of it, and protected certain parts of that rule. And so I think it might be safe. Uh, Time will tell. You know, we don't know. Congress would have to get in there and like make some pretty significant changes. They might, we now in the federal administration have a single party over all three branches of government, and so that makes it much easier for them to pass their priorities. So kind of like anything is on the chopping block. So we will see what happens.
Yeah, that's fair. I think a lot of people are asking right now what should we expect? What does this mean for our state and the laws and the protections? And I think, yeah, long story short is we're not 100% sure, but when it comes to the IRA, we think it's safe for now.
Yeah.
And I think there was even a comment between the commissioners about how oil and gas wants the IRA, right, parts of it because they benefit from government subsidies that are in that. So they were acknowledging that there is a pretty wide range of support for that legislation.
Mhm.
So the last thing that we flagged before we get to the public input section of the meeting is under the administrative matters portion of the agenda. So this portion of the agenda has approval of, I think the quote is certain agency contracts, which sounds so official and so vague at the same time. And we flagged that for a few reasons. And I was wondering if you could sort of explain, yeah, why we flagged that and what happened there.
This is something that's on the agenda every single month, and it's the commission has to approve contract amendments or new contracts that total $1 million or more. But one of the problems with the way the commission has been rolling out these approvals is that they're not providing any of the information about the contracts to the public in advance of the open meeting. And I've even put in open records requests as soon as the agenda comes out, and I don't get a response until long after the open meeting. And so it's really not a transparent process. The public should have an opportunity to weigh in on this as the commissioners are voting on it, and especially because it's so much money, and we have to guard public dollars and make sure that uh, we're giving these contracts to scrupulous operators, that the processes are fair, that the money is being wisely spent. And they're typically being spent on well plugging contracts, right, for orphaned wells and sometimes in emergency contracts. And so we definitely don't want to be holding up dollars that would be used to prevent water pollution or address an emergency scenario, but there should be transparency around what's going on, and it should be timely.
Yeah. And did we ever find out what the contract was today that was approved? Or is that still, we're not sure?
We would have to put in an open records request. It's not anywhere on the commission's website, and they have 10 days to respond to an open records request.
Interesting. Okay. So, another example of just, let us know, please. Um, so let's go to the public input part of the meeting. I think maybe we should start with Skylar's input and some of the things he talked about, and then we can talk about your input. And I think that'll segue into a recent community meeting, Community Connect space that Commission Shift hosted last night. So let's get into Skylar's input. I also want to draw attention to some really cool photos that you were able to take of Skylar that are now on our Twitter. And they show it's a better image. Often, like, he will come to these open meetings and he has a photograph or two from his property of what he's talking about, of these wells that are in different states of failure and leaking. And so we have a close-up image of him holding that, and you can kind of see a bit better what he's describing in his input. So we may have to just paint the picture here, but check that out. And I'll let you get into the details about what he said, Virginia, but I was struck with, as always, sort of his way with words. And I think one of the things that stood out to me that Skylar said today was his concern that if the Railroad Commission is not following the rules or evading responsibility for things that are under their jurisdiction, why are they asking for more things on their plate when it comes to oversight? And
Yeah.
he's, why can't you got to take care of the business that you have? So what stood out to you, I guess, about Skylar's input today?
Yeah, so a couple of things, right? And so there has been this sort of open question at the Railroad Commission the last couple of years about a certain type of well that's called a P13 well. These are wells that are drilled as oil and gas wells and then conveyed to landowners to use as water wells. Now, state law is clear that if a well was permitted by the Railroad Commission and it no longer has an active operator, the railroad, and it's been inactive for at least 12 months, that's an orphaned well, and the Railroad Commission has jurisdiction over that well and can go and plug that well. And so these P13 wells, if there's no operator around who originally drilled that well, or can go back and address the plug that they put in the well up to the base of usable quality water, then that qualifies as an orphan well, and that's in state law. But the Railroad Commission is choosing not to acknowledge these wells as orphan wells, even when they're causing problems, even when the operator's plug failed. And so they're leaving it to landowners to deal with these wells. Skylar had at one point a P13 well on his property that he tried to plug himself, and he spent over $200,000 on that well and didn't even finish. And so this isn't something that any old landowner could go out and deal with, nor should they be expected to deal with that. So the commission has said, Commissioner Christian in particular has said repeatedly, these are water wells, they're not under the Railroad Commission's jurisdiction. So Skylar brought today a type of water well that again is very clearly under the Railroad Commission's jurisdiction. And so there's a thing that operators do when they need water on site for either drilling an oil and gas well or doing something called enhanced oil recovery using water. And they will drill like they'll drill a water well on site that they can use for well operations. And those are permitted by the Railroad Commission, and they're very clearly under the Railroad Commission's jurisdiction. And so he had some photos that he shared with us of these wells that were failing. Do you want to share those photos now, SJ?
Oh, yeah, let me pull them up right now and I'll try to do a little screen share here. It's a good idea.
Okay, and while you're doing that, I'll kind of explain what he meant by them asking for more authority. And so the commission is asking for something called primacy from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and that is going to give them authority to permit and regulate carbon dioxide injection wells. These are called Class 6 wells. And so the Commission Shift has been opposing the Railroad Commission's primacy application because we see what a bad job they're doing with disposal wells in Texas. And so these are the wells that are causing earthquakes, guys are like well blowouts, sinkholes, leaks from other unplugged wells, and sometimes plugged wells. Oh, you have a different background.
I was trying to get Skylar's image,
Oh,
but
nice.
I'll keep working on it, but
There we go. We got it.
okay,
Yeah. Can we
good.
zoom in on that? I don't know. It's a possibility.
Maybe. No, I have it on it's a little bit small, isn't it?
Did that work? I zoomed in. I don't know if that worked.
I
I
don't
don't
think
know if the
so.
public can see that. Let's see.
We'll drop it on
I
the
think,
Facebook page underneath this after our call if folks can't see it on the screen share because
yeah,
it's
we'll see. And so Skylar is just trying to tell the commission, like, why are you trying to get authority over a new type of experimental injection well? If all the wells that you already have jurisdiction over are not being properly maintained or monitored or any of that. And so we agree with Skylar. This is not a technology that the Railroad Commission should be getting into. And I think I mentioned this before, but when carbon dioxide mixes with water, it forms carbonic acid, and that acid can eat away well bores, cement or metals inside the well bore. There was an oil and gas operator that testified at the legislature a couple years ago, and he said he drilled through a CO2 acid gas plume, and in 12 hours, his 5-inch heavy duty drill bit was completely eaten through, and he came out of the hole without a bottom hole assembly. And so this can be serious. We don't want the Railroad Commission to get into carbon dioxide willy-nilly. It's a serious issue, and they should be more careful before they take on more responsibilities.
Thanks for, yeah, that summary. And we have an active petition that is, if you haven't taken action yet, this is the one to do here in Texas. It is a petition to the EPA calling for those strengthened rules because of all the risks that you mentioned with the carbonic acid, with contamination of groundwater. I think that it seems like there's a lot of folks in West Texas who are starting to learn about this and are concerned because of what this could do to water supply or their soil contamination on their own land. So Skylar, I'll drop those photos because I think it's worth seeing. One of them, I think he noted, is being held together. It's the wellhead itself, and it's being held together by duct tape. So definitely check that out. And I also want to get to your public input, Virginia. And maybe let's recap sort of what you shared, and then sometimes the commissioners just say thank you and that's it, and sometimes they reply. So I think we should definitely talk about the response that your public input got today.
Yeah, so all right. So I talked to the commission about the importance of public input. I think it's really important for all of us, especially us voters, to think about this too, right? Because public input at a state agency is a part of public governance. voting is not the only way to share your voice. It's also not the end goal just to have someone out there representing you. You want to be able to have dialogue with your elected officials in public, in a manner that is transparent and where all of them can learn equally at the same time. And so, I asked the commissioners to consider allowing virtual public input during their open meetings, because it is so important for us to be able to learn together. And one thing I talked about is that it's important for the commission to be accessible to all kinds of people. And some of the people that we are hearing the most concerns from are elderly folks in the far reaches of the state who, are at a point in their lives where their body doesn't work the way they want it to. And it's hard for them to travel long distances to make it to a Railroad Commission open meeting. But these are people that have decades of knowledge, experience, sometimes experience working in the industry, and they have a lot of good information to bring to the table that the Railroad Commission ought to be considering as it makes its decisions. And so, we want the commission to be a place where information flows freely, where everyone, the experts, the industry, the commissioners can learn freely at the same time. And so that's why we're suggesting that the Railroad Commission make virtual public input regularly available at its open meetings. And so Commissioner Christian asked, a kind of an obvious question, right? Like, if the public can call us anytime and we have all these district offices, he's like, I'm talking to constituents every day. Why do we need to make virtual public input available at our open meetings, And I thought it brought up a really good question. It's like, why do we have public input at the open meetings? Like, why is it important? And so there are some structural reasons for that, right? The commission is a three-member elected body. No single commissioner can make decisions by themselves. They make decisions as a group. And you know, during the open meetings, that's an opportunity for someone to provide the same information in a transparent forum to the audience and the commissioners, all at once, and for all of us to kind of collectively learn from one another at the same time. And so I think it's really important. I don't think that a constituent should have to go to each commissioner individually and separately. I think it is important to have witnesses and have an audience, as this very important information that affects all of us in the state is discussed. And so we should be able to do that all at the same time. And we should be able to use modern technology to connect ourselves, even from the far reaches of the state.
Yeah, and I appreciated that distinction you made of, well, it's great that you're available, to the public, but it's not the same as having a forum, a meeting where we can all come together and hear the same information. And I think also I want to pull a quote from Twitter. A journalist shared this quote, or shared this tweet during the open meeting, and this is she said, the commission, at today's open meeting, Commissioner Christian says the agency is available for public engagement, quote, 24/7. I'm not sure if that extends to journalists. In 2 years covering the agency, staff has given me 0 interviews. So I think it's a fair point to say, are they 24/7 seems maybe ambitious, but also, are they really that accessible to everyone all the time? And if a journalist who knows the ins and outs of this agency can't talk to them, I think that also casts doubt that regular people can just all of a sudden know what to do to get Wayne Christian on the phone. I don't think that that is a pathway that feels accessible to most people. So I think it really brings out a really good point that maybe the oil and gas agency isn't as available as they want to be yet. And so, yeah, I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, good point. And we brought up the contracts issue earlier. This agency has been criticized for a long time for not being transparent enough to the public, and the open meetings are no exception. And I think because the name is so obscure and like not connected to what they do, the public has a hard time making complaints to the agency, getting the right person on the other line to solve their problems. The open meeting should be yet another access point where the public can have their concerns addressed, regardless of whether you can pick up the phone anytime and supposedly call a commissioner. So, yeah.
So that was basically our highlights from the open meeting. This is connected to the Community Connect space that happened last night. Virginia, you were there, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how this accessibility question is showing up in this organizing space and what we're looking at going into the end of the year and into next year.
Yeah, and so we talked to folks that are in our community, supporters, probably like some of the folks watching this right now. And we kind of got their feedback on like, would they want virtual public access? I think the resounding response was yes. And yes, I think some folks also yeah, some folks also echoed something that's come up in prior open meetings, which is that if you really want to access the commission, you would have to take time off work. You would lose wages for the day having to travel to Austin. Not to mention the fact that it costs money to like stay in a hotel. It costs money to like pay for gas, all of this stuff. And an ordinary person in Texas, especially someone making minimum wage, would have a really hard time paying for something like that. And so we need to make sure that this commission is accessible to everyone, not just oil and gas industry lobbyists. And so that's an important reason for doing it. But also, it's not just elderly persons who are sick and unable to travel all the time. It could be anyone in the state. And in fact, some folks are living next to this infrastructure and sick because of the infrastructure. And then, it would be too much for them to be able to travel to the agency regulating the infrastructure, even to say something.
Right. And as a reminder, these are Tuesday morning meetings, 9:30 a.m. on a weekday. So I think just about anyone, would struggle to make a cross-state trip in the middle of the week for something. But if you want to give input and can dial it up and have a Zoom moment on, and connect that way, that is so much more feasible for so many more people, right? Regardless of your background or any other given context. Um, so, man, that's such an important issue. I'm excited to see where it goes. And I think, even more interesting is the Railroad Commission does have the resources to do this. It isn't something that's totally unfamiliar to them, right? Like they have taken and accepted public input in the past that is virtually given, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And so during the pandemic, right, all state agencies were doing this. So it can be done. I think I have talked to some staff at the commission, and they did note that um, doing the hybrid meeting where there's like partial public input, virtual public input, and then some people live in the room can be a little bit of a challenge, but you know, people are doing it all over the US. I think it can be done. We just need to work out the kinks, and I think we can do it.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for talking us through this open meeting and explaining all of these different items. It already feels like it's the middle of the night with daylight savings. The shadows are long, but hopefully this recording will be useful to folks to hear a little bit about this monthly open meeting. The next open meeting for the Railroad Commission is December 17th. So we will be back live tweeting that as well, looking through the agenda items and talking through what the implications are. And as always, we really encourage folks to stay up to date on oil and gas news in Texas. Help us with our different campaigns for accountability at the Railroad Commission. You can follow us on social media. Our website is commissionshift.org. And we are always open to communicating questions, anything that you guys have and want to reach out to us about. So thanks again, Virginia. Thanks again for our listeners, and we will see you shortly here in Austin, online, everywhere in between.
Thanks, SJ, and thanks everyone for watching. Take care.
Bye.